Welcome to the Shalom Learning Center 10-minute Lectorium, where we focus our attention on the history of Judaism and Jewish people. This is our lecture number 8, and we're talking about Ezra, the priest, the scribe, and his contribution into development of what we know today as Judaism. And we talked about the system of worship which he basically instituted. This system was different than what was known better through the books of the Torah as the sacrificial system of worship, which was based on the pilgrimage festivals or feasts. People were supposed to come from every corner of the land of Israel into the temple 3 times a year during the Pesach, during the Shavuot, and during the Sukkot. These 3 feasts were connected with the harvest time. People would bring their tithes and offerings to the temple, and they would offer a peace offerings, and they would camp out around the sanctuary in the different places on the high hills around Jerusalem, and invite the guests, and they would have a festivity during this time. The other times when the temple was functioning for people was when a person needed to bring a sin offering to have expiation or atonement for their sins. Other than that, temple was not designed for people to come inside to worship as we sometimes think about it because of the English word sanctuary, which is used as the designation for a place of worship inside the church building. That wasn't the case. Sanctuary was not open for commoners beyond the altars. Only Levites and priests could enter at the certain designated areas. And sanctuary was not open for people who have any kind of ritual impurity. Even if you attended this funeral, you were not allowed to come into the temple for 7 days. And before you are entering the temple, after the 7-day period, you had to go up Mount of Olives and get yourself cleaned with the ashes of the red heifer. With what Ezra is doing at the public square, all these limitations aren't applicable, because what Ezra is doing, he is reading from the book of the law, from Sefer Torah. And everybody who understands is welcome to participate, men, women alike. And so Ezra focuses the worship around the reading of the Holy Book. And there is a worship, because what people do, they worship down to the ground, and Ezra blesses the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, and opens the book. So it's not just kind of a university-style lecture that Ezra does. This is all done in the context of worship, but this worship also feeds the mind, because Ezra has his disciples. They're named in the book of Nehemiah chapter 8, and they stand on the right side and the left side of Ezra. And what they do? First, what they do, they read distinctly. And then the second, what they do, they attach the interpretation. And the third, what they do, they make people understand. So, three things. First is read distinctly. It's not just speaking distinctly. What we have to understand is that the Torah was written without any punctuation, and the old text even without the division between words. So it was important to read it properly, separating sentence after sentence, paragraphs after paragraphs. That's what is called reading distinctly. In Hebrew, lefaresh. The root pei resh shin, to separate, actually is very important, because these people who are doing this kind of job, reading the text, separating it between the sentences and paragraphs, they become professional. And this profession is called perushim. That's how it sounds in Hebrew, and in Greek it sounds as Phariseos, Pharisees. So here is the roots of both terms that are often used in the Gospels, Pharisees and scribes. Ezra was the scribe, and his disciples were Pharisees. What's very important here is that among his disciples were not only the Levites, because what the book of Nehemiah chapter 8 does, it lists the names of the people who were not Levites, and then adds, and the Levites. So basically, Ezra opens the door for non-Levites to enter into the profession which was specifically selected for those who came out of tribe of Levi since the time of Moses. This is the revolution. That revolution sets up the foundation for what we know today as early Judaism. We have Ezra as the first teacher of the law who teaches the non-Levites who help him in interpretation and translation. These are the two other verbs that are used in the book of Nehemiah describing what was done during this worship. So they read distinctly, they give interpretation or explanation, and they make people understand what is involved there. We have to remember that people who came from the Babylonian exile lost their ability to speak and read Hebrew, because in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the main language was Aramaic. Aramaic and Hebrew are cousins. So people who went and returned from the Babylonian exile, they lost their ability to speak Hebrew, but Aramaic is very similar, but a little different. So Aramaic and Hebrew share the same alphabet, but the words are different, the grammar is slightly different, so people would not understand the language of Moses, because the language of Moses is 1,000 years old to them, and it's Hebrew. So this is why Ezra needs helpers, and these helpers provide translation of the Torah into the Aramaic, known as Targum. The word Targum is the translation. And so Ezra is basically pioneering into a new era for the history of Jewish people, because he establishes what is widely known today as the synagogue, the place of worship and the study of the scripture. And unlike the temple, which is the place of ritual, festival, and sacrifice, synagogue is open, can be open anywhere. And so synagogues begin to spread across Judea, Galilee, and into diaspora. And that's how we know about the Jews of the diaspora across Mediterranean.